Good afternoon, everyone. Oh, very bright lights. Thanks for coming along to my little talk on effective DevOps metrics. Hopefully we've got a few developers, development managers, developer-adjacent people in the room. The reason I want to talk about this today is because everyone over the past couple of months has been talking about something called productivity. And I want to try and guide everyone away today from productivity. Okay, I don't think productivity is a really great way of measuring software delivery. And I'm going to kind of dunk on productivity, and then I'm going to give you some better ways of doing it instead, which I hope will be useful to you today. So, I've got a couple of points here. I'm going to show this slide again at the end, just as a reminder of what I hope to have achieved by coming on here and chatting to you all today. We don't want to use productivity. We want to use some measurements that give us some idea about real outcomes. And we want to be careful about which information we use at different levels in our organization, which is kind of a classic mistake where you've got a number which works really well for you, and then you give it to your boss, and then it becomes like, oh, why did we do that? It's painful. So yeah, stop trying to measure productivity. Productivity is really like your personal feeling about how your work is going. So it's not really a number that you can put on a chart. It's not really something that your boss should be looking at. It just basically says, did I feel like I was in the flow today, or did I get loads of interruptions? Like, am I hitting goals, or am I just constantly tripping over things? That's really what productivity means. So software delivery isn't measured by this. That's just your personal view of your day. So my name's Steve Fenton. There's a quick slide with my name on it and my employer's name on it, Octopus Deploy. And the reason that I'm talking about this subject is because I'm into software culture and software methods. And I'm also a member of the DORA community. DORA are the research organization who produced the State of DevOps report. And I'll be using quite a lot of their work in what I'm talking about today. So, this is a software team. This is what we want to measure. Like, are we doing a good job? Like, do we feel like we're delivering good value for our organization? So we need somewhere to start. And we don't want to start here. We don't want to use lines of code. I've started with lines of code because I think we all know now that lines of code is not a good idea. But if you go back in time a little bit, everyone thought it was a good idea. So it's a good kind of example. I feel that productivity is being used a little bit like lines of code used to be used. It was like, we want to see something. We want to see a pile of things to know that we're getting value for money. There's also a more recent one, talent capability score. This came out of a large consultancy, and it's you take all these different numbers, and then you can judge whether an individual is useful to you or not. And I don't think that's a very healthy way of building a team that trusts each other and that collaborates on work. I think it's probably better to avoid talent capability scores. And I've already spoken about productivity, probably more than you want to hear for the rest of your lives. So don't use productivity. So this is what we want to use instead. Throughput and stability. And I don't know if anyone here has heard of the DORA metrics. There's a few hands. Cool. You'll recognize these. These are the two categories for the DORA metrics. And they are really useful to you in a software team because they help you to spot improvement opportunities in your work. And that's what they're really for. They're like prompts that say, maybe this could be better. What might be causing this? So we should probably break these down a little bit. Throughput is divided into change lead time. That is how long from when you commit a change for it getting into production. And it's deployment frequency, which is how many times an hour you're deploying your software. And it's okay if you're not doing it every hour. I'm only kidding. It might be weekly, monthly, whatever frequency you're actually deploying. And we'll do the same for stability as well. We want to balance these with stability because we could just rush, right? We could just deploy every couple of minutes, but it could make things worse for our customers. So we want to balance it a little bit. So stability gives us the change failure rate. That's how many changes result in either a complete outage or something fundamental not being usable by a customer. And this is slightly longer now. This used to be a shorter one, but it's now called time to recover after a failed deployment. This used to be called mean time to recover, but we want to tighten this definition up now. We don't really want to count natural kind of disasters, power outages, disk drives self-ejecting onto the floor. those aren't really the things we want to measure because they're not to do with software delivery performance. We still want to make sure that we're handling those well, that our disaster recovery situation is in hand. But for the purposes of the DORA metrics, it's now, if you do a deployment and that causes a problem, that's what we're measuring for this. So it's just slightly different to what it used to be. And this is why it really matters. And I'll stand and point at this line. It's this tiny line here. And what that says is your local measures for software delivery performance predict that your organization will be more successful. So that means you've got something that you can work on in your team that will help you make a bigger impact on your organization. So we've got things here like commercial and non-commercial goals. Commercial goals, that's the money. Obviously, most organizations need to at least take care of the money. But non-commercial goals could be things like we're trying to save the bees or we want to eliminate malaria. And both of those are positively impacted by you getting your software delivery performance right. So this is where things are very different to most of the other numbers people want you to measure, because it's something that when you do this thing, when you improve these numbers, your organization does better. And I think that's like a fundamental difference with all of the other metrics that we tend to see promoted in our work that we do. So, what about the SPACE framework? You may have heard of the SPACE framework if you've heard of the DORA metrics. The SPACE framework is effectively a way of building your own custom metric sets. And in the future, it might be something that you want to look at. But initially, when you're starting to measure things, it's probably too much for like day one. So don't look at it straight away. It's just too much information. But you can come back to it when you're like, we are super good at this. We want to get more advanced. Effectively, with the SPACE framework, it tries to make you measure across multiple dimensions. But the DORA metrics are already an example of this in action. Now, I don't know about your organizations, but what I typically have found in my career is that you're not measuring anything, right? You kind of do your job, you deliver your work, and there are no metrics involved at all. So kind of like your first step is to start measuring something. That's what the DORA metrics are going to help you do. The second step is actually more important because the second step is about doing something in response to those numbers. So instead of just collecting them and putting them on a dashboard, it's bringing them into your continuous improvement process. So looking at the numbers and saying, what can we do to make a difference to these? So once you've got those two steps in place and you feel that you are collecting and using your numbers, then come back and look at the SPACE framework then. Definitely don't start there. So one thing that I would add to the standard DORA metrics is developer satisfaction, which sounds a bit soft and fluffy. But it's very easy to collect because each time you finish a work item, you can do something as simple as putting an emoji that says how you felt when you delivered that work item. Did you feel like things were going well, or did you feel like things were problematic? Or you could do a regular survey in a Slack channel, kind of gather it that way. It can be super simple. But it's quite cool because developer satisfaction tends to predict what's going to happen with your software delivery performance. Because if all of your developers are feeling like they're in the zone and they're doing good work, they will tend to deliver well. And, more importantly, if you see the developer satisfaction numbers starting to fall, kind of gives you like a week or 2 weeks notice before it impacts your other metrics. So like, happy developers tend to perform better. So if you can detect a change, something's upset them, you can actually go in and fix that before it starts actually reducing your ability to deliver software. So that's the one metric I would add that kind of just brings that extra dimension into it. And so you now have like a full flow of developer satisfaction is going to predict your DORA metrics. Your DORA metrics are going to predict your organizational performance. So that's one team, right? We've got one team, we're using DORA metrics in our one team, and we can see what we're doing. The temptation now is we've been quite successful, and now we want to measure something across multiple teams. And there are some classic mistakes here, because especially when you've got something successful on a single team level, it can be tempting to just roll it out, right? So now we're going to measure the DORA metrics. We're going to calculate an average across all teams. But the problem with that is, if one team is improving their performance and another team is starting to slip, your numbers don't change, so it doesn't tell you anything. It's not actionable. Perhaps even worse is putting your DORA metrics on a league table. So now you've actually got teams kind of in competition with each other. And in most organizations, you've got some kind of core software that's kind of fundamental and absolutely needed for your business. And then you've got some other applications which maybe aren't as important, but now you're encouraging people to go to those less important applications and start doing work in them to bring these metrics up, even though those aren't the applications that are going to make a difference to your organization. So you're sending people to put effort in the wrong place. And the last problem that I've seen happen quite a lot is that you take your DORA metrics and you just send them all the way up to the C-suite, right? Stick it on a report, management report or a dashboard, get it in front of them. And actually it's quite tempting to do this, because if you're actually improving your process and you're seeing those numbers improve, it's tempting to show off that number. But once it lands in those reports, your leaders start then wanting to see those numbers change. And these aren't the numbers that they should really care about. I'm going to give you some different numbers for that instead. So use your DORA metrics, use your developer satisfaction within each team as part of continuous improvement process. Cool. So if we're not giving our bosses the DORA metrics, what do we give them instead? For this, we need to imagine that we're on a software team. So this is our software delivery process. It probably doesn't map exactly what you do as a process, but you've got some reason to do a piece of work. Someone says, we want to develop a feature, and there'll be a reason why they want to develop that feature. And that's your goal. We're just going to call it a goal for the purposes of this session. You can call it an epic or a story or something else. And then there's the actual change we're going to make to the software that we think will move us towards that goal. And we're going to call that an experiment because it might not actually work. And then lastly, we've got feedback. And that's where we find out whether or not our change had the effect that we thought we were going to have. This might be easier if I turn it into a more real example, like something that we might do. So imagine we all run an online store, and we've got a problem where people put stuff into their shopping basket, but then they kind of abandon and they don't complete the sale. So we have a goal where we want to reduce our abandoned baskets by 10%. We can see the value of those baskets. If we can reduce it by 10%, that's a lot of money that we can get into our organization, give the developers a pay rise. We need to put a number on this, because if we just said reduce abandoned baskets, we don't really know when to stop. We would keep on making changes, trying to get that number down to 0, and it's not realistic to try and get that far. So we want to put a limit on our investment. We'll be happy once it's 10%. And our experiment that we're going to try for this is we're going to remove unnecessary checkout steps. Try and shorten that process, see if that makes a difference. It might not, but we're going to try it and just do an experiment. And then we need to measure something to find out if our changes are working. And in this case, we want to reduce abandoned baskets, so we should probably measure abandoned baskets. But we also want to measure some other things that we might affect with our changes. So, as an example, average basket value. What might happen when we reduce our checkout process is we might remove an upsell screen, and we may find that more people complete the checkout process, but they're no longer purchasing those upsells. So now the business can make a decision about whether the upsells are worth more money than the abandoned baskets, can compare those numbers. So we might need some additional metrics that stop us from damaging other outcomes. And what I'm basically suggesting is that's the numbers that you should be giving to your leaders. So you should be showing them the numbers about these things, which are the things they should be caring about. They shouldn't really care about your deployment frequency or your change failure rate. Those things help, because if your DORA metrics are strong, you can do more of these experiments. That's the reason behind them. But your leaders, hopefully, are more interested in these numbers, the results of your experiments. Sorry about that. I've got a microphone strapped to me, so I couldn't move it away for that cough. Do apologize. So here's like a summary of what I've been through here. Your software team should have these metrics: throughput, stability, satisfaction, and they're using that themselves. There's a big line there. We're not going to just share them around with everyone. We're going to use those for ourselves. And then your product teams will be looking at those goals from your impact maps, which is your map of these goals. And then your organization will be measuring itself on its organizational goals. And that's back to the making money, saving bees, whatever it is that your organization is on the planet to do. So this is the importance of elevation, because if we start putting these numbers over there, we're distracting people from the numbers that really matter. You know, if you show your CTO your deployment frequency, they're going to get very interested in something which isn't actually the right level for their title. So yeah, we want to show those numbers, and we want to show the direction that we're heading with those numbers. So hopefully abandoned baskets coming down, bees going up. So this is back to the first slide, and then we're going to take some questions. So hopefully you've got some questions you'd like to ask. Productivity is not a useful measure, except for yourself. It's okay to think, was I productive today? For everything else, we would like to measure real outcomes, but real outcomes can be slow. So if we can get a number that will tell us early that the real outcomes are going to change, we'll use them. Software delivery performance, early indicator of organizational success. So it's useful in that respect. And we want to make sure that we keep the numbers where they are useful. So keep them in the hands of the people who can do something about them. And one of the interesting points on that, if you're doing like a retrospective, if you're in a high trust organization, hopefully your retrospectives include your product managers, you know, your direct line manager. These people can help you with improvements. But I do understand if you're not in a high trust culture, that you might feel a bit weird about having those people in the room. So focus on the culture problem first, rather than like ruining your retrospectives. That's absolutely okay. So thanks very much. I've stuck some social links up there if you want to contact me with any questions after the session. But if anyone's got any questions, just fire them up. We are happy to accept them. I think we may have a microphone flying down to you now.
Hello. So the first barrier to entry to getting some DORA metrics is actually getting the data. What advice do you have to get some reliable data that shows, you know, a good outcome your DORA metrics really are?
That's a great question. So, yeah, this is a really good question. The first problem with DORA metrics is, where do you get them from, basically? You may be lucky that you've already got a software system which has something that's close to DORA metrics. Now, what you're likely to find is your build system does not have the full information, the same as your, like, so you'll find it's all in different places, right? Like, oh, I wish this was all in one place. There are some tools that can help with that, but don't be afraid to survey to get initial numbers to get you off the ground. So don't wait until you've got like a perfect measurement system with automated graphs and everything like that. Just like run a survey and ask the questions that you can find on dora.dev. All of the surveys from the research questions are there, including the ones about deployment frequency, change failure rates. And there's also a quick check on there that you could run with your team. So it's okay to start off with numbers that are like, they're in the ballpark, but they're not perfect. As you improve the metrics, you'll want to be able to see the improvements. They'll be smaller and you'll need more precision. But on day one, just knowing, is it weekly or monthly, is enough. And you can probably tell that even without any system data. Is that okay? Cool. Are there any other questions? Yeah, we've got a question over here.
Good session, thank you. A question on developer satisfaction you mentioned. Why only developer? There are other members in the team who are part of the delivery?
Yep. Yeah, so 100%. So when I say developer, there's a whole bunch of people involved in software delivery. You've got developers, you've got testers, You might have someone called a product owner, a product manager. You may have like a security expert. There's all kinds of specialists in your team. And when I say developer, they're all in. They're all in the gang. So yeah, track all of them. Not just programming skill sets, but all of the other skill sets too. We want to know that the whole team delivering software is happy. Thank you. Oh, yep, we have a question over here. Sorry, I have to duck under the lights.
Thank you for the question. What are the challenges that you have faced when you try to implement this in your organization? What are the challenges you have faced when implementing this one within your organization, and what is the feedback that you receive?
So, challenges implementing healthy metrics. I suppose one of the biggest challenges to all of this is your team and organizational culture. Some organizations want to drive everything with metrics in a way that maybe isn't healthy. So trying to prevent things like the aggregation where you're creating averages, or the elevation where the numbers are getting fired too far up in the organization, that's usually the problem, because as soon as you have a dashboard, people want access to it. And it's actually one of the hardest things to explain to your boss, why this needs to actually be kept more local. So yeah, that's a good question. I'm sure loads of people have got different challenges from when they've tried to do this. But for me, culture is probably like #1 thing to solve in your organization. I do have some information on something called the capability culture cycle, which is how, when you don't run the organization, you can just tell people what your culture is, which I'm not even sure the CEO can do. It shows you some small steps you can take just under your control that can start that process of change. So just if you want more on that, just hit me up. Okay. There's a question over here.
How do you convince leadership that it's really all in on productivity measurements, that they aren't the most effective way to measure things?
Yes. So how do you convince your leaders not to go down the productivity route, especially when big consultancies are telling them to do it, right? Which is why they're all interested at the moment. So there's a good answer and an evil answer on this. The evil answer is let them do it, right? It's going to become apparent very quickly that it's not going to work, because you end up creating the conditions of competition. So people are going to stop wanting to help people on their teams. There'll be like a junior team member, and people will be like, I could help them, but then my talent capability score might drop, right? So maybe I won't help them. So that's like the evil answer. Probably don't do that, because you go too far down that route, it's going to be impossible to unpick that and get back to a healthy state. Perhaps a way to broach the subject with them will be to bring them to Dora's research program, because that program's got some really strong indicators that might convince them otherwise. And obviously, Google backed that research program, so it's another big name. That might be one of the ways that you could convince people who are listening to a big consultancy. Use Google's kind of name to help promote these healthier ways. And Dora.dev has got, it's not just about technical practices, it is also about cultural practices as well. So hopefully that will help swing it. But yeah, I absolutely wish you luck in that quest. Okay. I think we have another question over here.
I see. So on the last point, there's a paper that's a couple of years old I found recently on the Dora site about the ROI of investing in DevOps, and it only counts millions of dollars of savings against each of the 4 home metrics. I'm just a lot of advice group to be aware of this paper. I'm hoping you seem to be moving away from that. Do you think Dora is going to kind of change their position, that sort of stuff, or evolve away from that way of looking at things?
Yeah, that's a great question. So yeah, there's a white paper on Google's cloud site called the ROI of DevOps, and they take in a couple of different use cases and show how much money you can save and also how quickly you can get your payback from DevOps. For me, that's really what we're talking about when we say that the software delivery performance is translating into these other more impactful things for the organization. I don't think it's changed. Obviously, depending on how much you look like those case studies, your number will differ. I've worked traditionally in some small startups. They didn't even have that amount of money flying around, so they definitely wouldn't have saved that much, right? But obviously, you're looking at, once you get things in place, you're looking at very fast return on investment. I think in some cases 30 days. So yeah, it's an interesting paper. I don't think we're moving away from it, but I think I would prefer organizations found a way of validating that for themselves. So measure their own numbers. That would be my recommendation. So with all of these metrics, like when we say the DORA metrics predict organizational performance, don't take my word for it. Don't take DORA's word for it. Like, measure those numbers and prove that relationship exists for yourself. Cool. Okay. I think we're done with questions. So thank you very much, everyone. Have a great rest of your conference.